Sending Ether. Throughout the course, we've seen us send Ether to the contract whenever we place an order in our pizza contract example. And we also managed to give the person a refund using the transfer method. In today's video, we're going to learn about different ways that we can transfer and send some Ether. For the example, I'll implement a withdrawal function. Now, why is this important to implement withdrawal functions within your contract? Well, if we look at deploying the contract and we're going to place an order and let's send 1 or let's send 3 Ether. If I place an order, I can see that the balance of the contract now holds an amount of 3 Ether in total. Now the scary part is if we were to deploy this exact contract to the blockchain and someone sent us 3 Ether to the contract, there will be no way for us to extract the Ether because a contract doesn't have a private key and is instead governed by the rules and functions it has. So there's no method for us to withdraw this Ether. So as developers, it's our job to make sure that we implement methods for us to extract the Ether, maybe sending it from the contract to the owner. And in this case, we will learn about different methods of how to send Ether: the transfer method, send, and call. Before we start coding, let's clean up our place order. I have this pizza selection, which has come along from previous tutorials. Now, I'm simply going to remove this pizza selection because technically we don't really use it. I'm going to take it that our pizza place only ever has one size or one pizza that someone can order. So I'm going to remove all the kind of references to this pizza selection, and that should be perfectly fine. Now our contract is ready, so let's go and implement this withdrawal function right here at the bottom. We'll type function because we want to create a new function. It's going to be called withdraw, and this will be a public function. However, I'm going to add the only owner modifier that we have created in the previous sessions to this function. We don't want anyone to be able to call it except for the owner of this contract. Now let's firstly take a look at the transfer method that we've seen before. In order to be able to pay the owner the Ether that's in the contract, let's specify a payable address. This address could be the message.sender because we know only the owner will be able to call this function. We will then call the transfer method, and in here we could specify some amount of way. Now essentially we want to have all the funds in this contract to be sent to the owner once he calls this function. But how do we know how much Ether is in this contract? Well, we could use the this keyword. Firstly, let's specify that we want to pass an address, and in here we're simply going to say this. This keyword refers to this contract's address, and of course we could get the balance. So we could technically say that we want to transfer this contract's entire balance. And this method should now be able to extract the Ether from this contract. Let's test it out. So let's deploy this contract, make sure that we send it some Ether. In this case, I'm going to send 5 Ether. I'm going to place an order, and this time we don't have our selection, so we can simply just place the order. And here we can see we have 5 Ether in the contract. We can also see we only have 90 Ether right now. This is the owner's address. So I can now technically click on withdraw, and hopefully, and indeed, the balance is 0, and we got back our 5 Ether. And that is kind of how you can extract the Ether from a contract, or at least send it. Now the transfer method is deemed to be an older way of sending Ether, and there are better ways that we can now try and should preferably use. So the next possible way is actually the send method. Now I'm going to comment this out, and here I'm actually going to specify a bool, and in here I'm just going to say this is success, maybe the bool, and this is going to equal to this. Now instead of saying transfer, we are going to say send. Now this is exactly the same as this transfer. Instead, the send method returns a boolean, And this variable over here we can omit, but if we want to use it in maybe a require statement, so we can type require, and we're going to say that we need this to be successful, otherwise it needs to revert, right? And this could be seen as a better way to use send than transfer because we have this extra kind of security check. And this makes sense because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the ether is actually sent. However, both transfer and send takes up about 2,300 gas units, and that's a fixed amount, where there's a third call that we could use. And I'm going to show you this because now, these days, this is the recommended way of transferring ether, and that is to use the call method. Now, the call method returns to us two variables, so it returns a Boolean, which we could consider as success or not, and then it also returns to us a bytes, and we could just make this memory data, right? But instead of taking this data, because that's more advanced, that we'll get in later, I'm going to omit that by just keeping the comma. And then we can go ahead and say message.sender, right? And .call, like so. Now the call method doesn't start off with brackets, instead it has these curly brackets where we're going to specify the value, and think of this as like a JSON format where we specify the value and then our value that we want to send. And after that, we execute it by just placing in the brackets and an empty string for the data, the call data. Now, this is perfectly fine and it works like before, so we can technically take this require statement, put it in here, and uncomment this. Now, the reason why this is preferred is because when you send gas, this function actually forwards the gas as well, and essentially is just way better than these two methods. So use this when you are going to send or transfer some ether to an address. And just to make sure that everything is still working, we're going to redeploy our contract, send it again 5 ether, place the order, we can see the 5 ether there, our amount that has been deducted, and if we withdraw this, it's successful, the ether is gone from the contract and back in our address. So you can see that that works perfectly fine.